deepening the inflection discussion. Now, these are not intended to be exclusive. There might be other possibilities, but we start with a lexicon of saying something and then attaching a gesture to it. This comes under the heading of we often show things, ask for things, but do the opposite, and when we get the opposite, we create frustration and anger at what just happened. And much of conducting is told us through the lens of about being clear. What's the missing word? About being clear about the music, not being about clear in your pattern is the mistake that's made. Because to conduct a pattern can be a beautiful thing. I know I spent hours at USC when they used to have chalkboards, and we had big chalk, and I was told by my instrumental conducting teacher to not get on a podium until I could do exactly what it looked like on the cover of the Grammar of Conducting. I had to copy that exactly, and I can do it to a fairly well. Now, please tell me what piece of music I'm conducting. There is no music there, and there's not even a thought process there other than which is pretty much what it sounds like, right? So, Rod suggested, this is going back 35 years ago now, that there were inflections that we could attach to any particular syllable or word or musical note or rhythm that was worth codifying before we made the conducting gesture. And you just saw that in San Francisco, right? So the inflections are the rises and the falls, but they are also spatial, and they also have a gestural implication. That is, if I do this and have you say one, do it again. One. Please don't accent. One. We just lost trust, right? Yeah. So in 2 seconds you lost trust of your choir because you say, but he hit that pretty hard, and he doesn't want me to hit it pretty hard, right? So say it again. One. Again. One. Now they're starting to get some meaning, okay? We call that function a down function. So I hope you can learn that the first beat of the piece of music is not necessarily a down function. When I do Like as a Culver of Halsey Stephen, it does not start with a down function. It starts with a through ictus, through a rising feeling, like as a culver on the barren. We don't get an accent till the parrot. So there can be no point in my conducting that shows down. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like as, well that's up, isn't it? Like as a culver on the barren. And I call that Christmas tree conducting. Where you're drawing the branches of the fruit tree on the way up. And like as a culver on the barren bough. Now I did something else with the inflection. I went there, which we call what? There. And I went and bow to here. Changing the dynamic, changing the inflection through my gesture. Traditionally it looked like this. Like as a culver on the barren bough. And now you plead with them to be more musical. Mm-hmm. But if I go, it's all there, right? Mm-hmm. Did you sing that at SC? Did they do it 1 year in the chamber?
No, we did a little bit.
Oh, you did? Well, we'll be doing that too.
Yeah.
So, can I get Dr. Hurt's interpretation out of my head? No, I can't. But can I re-look at the piece and see maybe slightly other places of opportunities for me to be a little bit more, conscious of what I thought Halsey Stevens want? Did I meet him? Yes. Did I have dinner with him? Yes. Did I party in his house? Yes. Did I hear him speak? Yes. So I have some sonic icons in my head. He's a sweet, sweet, beautiful man, whose music, by the way, should be more performed today, in my opinion, than it is. Lady Is Thy Fair Swan is a great piece. He's got just some wonderful things. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that we have these inflections. So if I go like this, What inflection are you going to assume I want? Down. Do it.
Down. 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 Up.
How'd you know that?
Preparation.
I didn't. Well, it's not like prep, but it's iconic. So we divide these gestures as, we call these iconic gestures. They just simply mean what they say. And I can go anywhere in the world and go, how are you? How are you? Yanta? Tarinanta. Doesn't matter the language. They have an uprise, and they have a downfall. So they may not call it down or up, but there's the inflection. And then we had what?
Here.
So let's do the gesture and say the sound.
Down. Up. Here. There. There.
Right. You want to say over there, but it's just more there, right? And then large,
Large.
small,
Small.
out,
Out.
in, out, in. Okay.
Out.
So those are 9 inflections. Find more, share them with us, and we'll add them to the pedagogy. But so far, that's what we see as distinctively different in terms of direction. What's interesting is that up and down is on the vertical plane. And large and small is on the horizontal plane. And here and there is on the sagittal plane. So you have these planes that you can examine in your conducting that will convey unique special meaning if you employ them efficiently. Am I making sense now about that? And so particularly pay attention to those in instrumental conducting. I'm going to have Dr. Gravis explain why here for a second, because he does this extremely well. Why is this so important, especially with conducting instrumentals?
The geography of how we move our hand in patterns. Because instrumentalists only have their part in front of them on the page, and they're uber reliant on the conductor to help organize for them and affirm what they see on their page to make it come together cohesively or in space.
Exactly. And I noticed that in sight reading and choral music, we have all the parts, but they don't see any of them. What is the only thing they're mostly looking at? Their own words.
Yeah.
They're not looking at anything else. Here they got the full score in them, and they're not taught to look at the full score. In fact, my first day in choir, I was a trumpet player and drum major of the band, and I got into chamber singers. And the first day we're in there, and I'm looking around going, what's the, SATB, and I said to Betsy Hensey sitting in there, hey Betsy, what's SATB mean? She went, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, stupid. I didn't know, what did I know? I was 15 years old and trying to find myself around the world. So the inflections can be used at any point on any beat in any place. So for instance, if I want my 2 to be a down, then I would go, I'm going to turn as into a down. Like as, I have to have the preparatory gesture that says this is going to be a down. If I want an up, then I need a preparatory gesture that says it's going to be an up. Like as. If I have a preparatory gesture that I want to say that it's more here, then I'm going to go like as. If I want it to be there, like changes the quality, doesn't it? So that's the inclusion of your gesture as influenced by an inflection. And then we add to it in our pedagogy some Kodai-esque approach, which is to identify every rhythm as a weight. So don't confuse inflection down with inflection crucis. They have similar qualities, but they can have variable qualities. So would you mind, Dr. St. Reed, talking a little bit about the rhythmic weights, coming on down and talking about that? By the way, I put these people on, but they had no warning I was going to do this to them. So it just only shows you how smart they are.
This is their comprehensive exam.
Because in my book, they're giving all the correct answers.
They're speaking our comprehension.
But all of these folks contributed beautiful articles to the book called The Primer of Conducting. So can you just talk about the 5 rhythmic weights for a brief second?
Why don't you start making?
Okay, so it's the difference of understanding in rhythmic weight that each note, this is kind of Copeland-esque if you think about it. In his book on composition, he talks about that a note is either a point of arrival or a point of departure, which generally has some sense of accentuation or gathered energy, versus a note that dissipates away from them, which we call, and rather than a note that gathers the energy, anacrusis, to the note that's off the beat, syncopation, or the note that suspends time, that moment right after the metacrusis, before we prep for the next event, which often happens in a fermata, or happens in a rest. Rest is the most underappreciated music that goes on most of the time because most people don't account for it. You know, it's a little bit like acting. You read your lines, and you memorize your lines, but what do you forget to do? To listen to the other person, and then have the space between. Every acting teacher will tell you that's lesson 1, learn to listen. Learn to listen. More than talk. So do you mind doing a little demonstration of those?
Yay.
You put the clocks in the book, you're responsible.
I was going to do this in my conductor class today,
good.
so
It's a preview.
So it's a preview. So this is the way that I began to understand the physics of gesture and how we become predictable machines for our ensembles to correctly interpret where we're marking where time goes by, right? That's essentially what an ictus is, right? We're basically touching the points in time as it unfolds in time. And Don brought this idea of the metronome, and it doesn't really work with your little like mechanical metronomes that are in your iPhone apps because they kind of just are I call them scanners, like like the robot eye that just goes back and forth, right? But if you look at an old time like mechanical metronome, you'll notice that it's creating an arc. It's a stationary arc. It goes in a very unified way. But if you paid close attention to it, you realize that it's not moving in a unified way. It's not doing the robot scan like this, right? As it goes down, there's a weight that pulls it down and gravity exerts pressure on it. And then there's a spring inside that exerts the pressure to move it the other direction. So when it's going, it basically has more speed near the top, and as it approaches the ictus, or the next point in time. And the kind of eye-opening thing that Don showed me was like, well, how do we count the internal beats? We all kind of get the idea of the regularity of ta, 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 right? And that makes sense to us, but we never really pay attention to where the internal beats. And I realized after I thought about it that we wind up thinking of it as mathematics, and mathematics for us are very black and white. So we divide that space where it's clicking into half, and we think, okay, that's where the and should be, right? And then if I go in and I'm going to divide the space into 3, then it's going to be here, right? And then the phenomenon is because of this change in acceleration, they wind up happening in this golden area in the top, right? And this becomes the center of where we do subdivision, and it's kind of like this magic thing. And when we put it into our gesture, then we are very clear as we, as observers, where that subdivision happens. And all the subdivision happens in this golden point. So when we're doing like this, we're just going to count ta, ta, and then we're going to go ta, ti, ta, ti. Okay? Ready? And ta, 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 ti, ta, ti, ta, ti, ta, ti, ta, ti, ta, ti. Try to stop where T is. Ta, ti. Somewhere close in this top, right? And I see everybody just past the apex. Not exactly at the apex, but just past the apex. That's really good. And then if we're going to do a triple subdivision, let's see what happens. So what do y'all like to use in your nomenclature for triples?
One lolly.
One lolly. Okay, so let's count 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3. Just making sure. Ready? And 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 1 lolly, 4 lolly, 1 lolly.
2 lolly.
Now stop on lead.
4 lolly.
Where was it? We're gonna stop on lead. Let's do it again. Ready? 1 lolly, 2 lolly,
3 lolly, 4 lolly, 1 lolly, 2
Stop.
lolly.
There you go. Everybody's just past the apex. I went way past the apex because I was looking at you. Don't let my dysfunctionality. Again, be an observer and not a, trier. So it happens in this golden spot, and then if we can do that, we can actually prepare time and create a meaningful communication that is accessing all of those micro gestures that we read. So we're using the same part of the brain.
It's in the irrefutable laws of gravity. It's irrefutable to the laws of nature. Yeah.
And then sometimes when we try to put our minds around it, we look at it in a very black and white thing. But acceleration is a very weird thing. And so you'll notice that there's suspension at the top, which is one of the parts of our beat that we talk about, is suspension is at the top. But there's also a fall into the next beat. And so speed is not even. It's not the robot scanning the room. So we translate this to gesture to make it more clear and effective. So when he's talking about clarity, clarity comes from knowing how to move in space and time to create language that we can communicate with our ensemble.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Like if you were to toss a ball into the air, you can anticipate where it's going to land and how to catch it.
But where do you anticipate?
In the suspension.
At its suspension, not at its throwing up.
That's right.
That's the magic of that. And so we divide the gesture into two functions. Remember, a function is like saying plus or minus or divided or multiplied. So our result will be different depending on what function we use. So the ictus is the touching point. Will that involve inflection? Very much so.
Yes.
In fact, it is the result of the prep that tells you what that ictus is going to sound like. The ictus has 3 functions within it, and that is the ictus of to, the ictus of through, and the ictus of from. So you have 3 choices for an ictus. Let's do 4 throughs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's add a down, 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 up inflection. 1, 2, 3, 4. So notice that when we did the through to try to create the lift, we suddenly found that our ictus function wasn't as helpful. That what would be more helpful to gather energy to the downbeat? 2 through or from?
2
From. 1, 2, 3. When I go from, the second I go from, I feel like I'm gathering the energy, take that. Now I can dissipate energy with it too. But this is what we want you to start puzzling out. Before you move your arms, we're actually asking you not to practice with your arms, but to know it through your audiation by having made decisions about to, through, or from, or is it down, or is it up, or is it here, or is it there, before you ever. And there's graphic material you can use, or invent your own if you wish. The second function of the arm is rebound. And the rebound has 2 functions within it. As Dr. St. Marie beautifully demonstrated, the first motion away from the ictus is demonstrating the speed of the subdivision. I want you to notice, how many of you know Mozart's La Lente Domino? Right? Drag, bless you.
Oh my goodness.
That's really unusual. but beautiful in its own way. Alright, so will you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with me, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Having a little trouble following? Now watch me change that all the subdivisions, and here's the principle. All subdivisions go in the same direction. Don't change direction until you're going to the second part of rebound, which is to prep. This now has to have a bit of a suspension or a bit of metacrucis elan to it at the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But watch what I do with my hand next, down or up. Has to go up to prep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got the idea? In other words, as it starts to fall, then people will guess at where the next ictus is. So it usually takes me a couple of passes to get the second violinist to notice that I'm actually conducting it accurately. Because what they're used to seeing is this. D, 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 and I'm showing D, 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 D. I'm showing all the subdivisions in one direction. And what happens after they do it, they start playing it together, and they're all looking at each other, how did that happen? Because they don't know the principle, they know the feeling of it. Because it matches their bow. It matches their bow length. Because they don't change direction in their bow. D, 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 D. If they were going D, 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 then I would do it differently. So let's count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So do I need to subdivide?
No.
No, because subdivision is either a conductor demonstrating they've lost control, or you want accents. So we only subdivide if we want accentuation. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Perfectly tolerable. But I don't change that if I want a smooth transition between those beats, and I want the 16th notes to flow. Make some sense? So the functions of the arm, ictus and rebound. Ictus has all the inflections in it. The rebound has the subdivision of time and then the prep for time, which means at that point you have made your inflection decision.
Can you say that again, sorry?
Yeah. The arm has 2 primary functions. Ictus, the touching beat we call it, where you touch time. And the rebound, which has 2 functional divisions. The subdivision of time, which is the away from the ictus. And all subdivisions must go in the same direction. Now you see lots of examples of successful conductors who don't do that. There is this notion that people get used to seeing you and so assume. That can work. I never lived in that world. I had 8 weeks to prepare a concert, so it had to be totally visual and clean and clear.
And the second functional division is the prep.
Is the preparation of the next inflection and the next ictus. All of those, by the way, can be dynamic. Let's do it with me, please. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that subito piano issue that most of you have, that you get all wound up, watch it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. As opposed to, and we haven't talked a lot about this today, but we have 2 terms, wait, W-A-I-T, which has to do with metacrucis suspension and preparation, and weight, W-E-I-G-H-T. You change your arm weight, and you will change the dynamic. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the general idea. I wasn't perfectly clean in that, but the idea is that you're prepping the soft. You're not just suddenly soft. So everything you conduct is about intention in the future, and it's about making decisions through inflection and through function. And you have to have those decisions made. Make those decisions in advance.
You will find very happy conducting teachers when you've made a decision and you can demonstrate that decision. And then we'll hold your feet to the fire of understanding how to do the function. We do that pretty well, which has a postural, postural thing and all that. Okay, we've basically reached the end of our time. Was this helpful to you today to kind of get an orientation towards our pedagogy? Dr. Gravis has some announcements to make.
Thank you very much, Professor Greger.
Inflection to me stands right at the beginning, the point of departure for everything we do in conducting anymore. For me, it's the point of departure. And the reason is because it preempts the accentuation of meter. It's the beginning of meaning. And I actually want to capture some of the things that were said before when you were talking about the vocal world. Because the world of inflection is about play. Robert? It's about play. When in order to be effective with inflection, you have to play with language. You have to play with rhetoric. You have to take language and take it apart, parse it, experiment with it, and experiment with the meaning of a phrase. It's about play. Then there was another phrase. It's about rhetorical meaningfulness in real time. Rhetoric is the difference between Sir Laurence Olivier and Joe Schmo. Okay, Joe Schmo is anybody who takes a Shakespearean play and reads it too boring. It's the antidote to insomnia.
Look, what breaks in yonder window?
Okay, it is the absolute antidote to insomnia. So, but Sir Laurence Olivier can take the Fibonacci sequence and put it into a 4-hour play and make it feel like 25 minutes. You know, you go to the Shakespearean troops in London and it makes sense, you know? Because they have taken the inflection of the rhetoric and they make it work. Then there was another phrase. It's an antidote to fixed energy. Because it doesn't fix the accented metric energy of the conducting pattern. And that's where I wanted to start with this. The book that starts with the patterns of conducting 3, 4 are fixing the energy. It fixes the energy and it imposes that energy onto, I mean, there's no music, but it's imposing it on all music, basically. So when we're talking about inflection, what is inflection? It is all the opposite of that. It is not fixing the energy to the language, and then it is a gestural language that would capture that. And the most beautiful rendering of that is probably Kuranami. Chant, because it takes the language of chant, it takes the language of the Latin, Roman chant, language, Latin, and it takes the Agagic accent, and it puts it captures it in the hand, and the word that I always use is San Francisco because it has several points of accentuation. San Francisco. And it ends with a metacrucis that just sort of dissipates into the ether. San Francisco. And when you stop the word just dissipates and goes on and on. So it doesn't end with a particular stop. It ends with a gesture that has San Francisco. And you have the metacrucis that ends. So you have to feel that dissipation. So can we try that? Now, when I have more time, I go, individually through the classes we've done before, but we don't have time today, so we'll just do it collectively. So you can, individually within yourself, but San Francisco.
San Francisco.
But you have to feel that double, almost suspension, you almost want to feel like it does a double rise at the end and becomes the cloud that just, think of it like you go, and it just puffs away. So San Francisco. Metacrisis. You have to feel that dissipation, right? So that is the inflection, for example, of that word, San Francisco. Now, it starts with my saying the word. So what are the characteristics of inflection? An acute sense of paying attention. I say the word, or somebody says the word, the word speaking to you in the language, you're reading the word, and it speaks to you, and you pay close attention to it. San Francisco. You pay attention to it. It could come in your name. Linda. Stephanie. William. Robert. Each of these names, if they say it to you, you pay attention to it. Those are inflections. Ubi caritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Then when it's sung, ubi caritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Ubi caritas. We just pay attention to it, and we keep diving into it a little deeper, paying attention. Ubi caritas. And our hand follows it, and that's inflection. And that's why we start with this instead of ubi caritas. Instead of that.
Thank you. Well, you're learning and probably known by many people in the business, probably everybody in the back row. But when Rod Eichenberger came to SC, he asked the faculty to sit with him and talk about their pedagogies.
Ooh.
And they refused.
Wow.
And so he left. Yes. He left because he was tired of working by himself, doing all the recruiting, bringing everybody in, having everybody all the country come in. And then when they get there, what did they discover, my friends in the back who have degrees from SC? That there were some incredible scholars and good guys and gals teaching that we got to discover who we didn't know before we got there, because we only knew the one name, right? So a program isn't built around one name. A program is built around a faculty that is not in competition with each other except for one thing. And we are competitive this way, and I'm proud of it, for the better idea. We don't lose anything by competing for the better idea. The thing is, I'm not offended when someone has it. I steal it. And I tell them up front, I steal it. Because it's good. You know, and then you're at that point in the career, I don't know who I stole from anymore. Unless it's fairly recent. I had someone come in and says, oh my God, you remind me of Charles Hurt. I'm not injured by that. I'm complimented by that. Or, wow, you conduct, there's a lot of Rod Eichenberger in you. Well, thank you very much. Do I think I have my own look and my own way of doing it? Yeah, I think I've gotten to that stage, but it sure took a long time to get to that place. So we compete for the better idea, but as we do among here, we don't beat someone up because they have an idea. Please stop it. I know who you are who do it. Stop it. It's just not helpful. It's not nice, okay? We work for the greater good. So my question to you is that Rounds is not about competing between studios or who is the better conductor or who's got it. It's about isolating ideas that need to be worked on, and we have a pedagogy to back it up. So when you come to Rounds, come prepared to announce an issue. an issue that you want to work on so that you are a better communicator. Sometimes you might share an issue with somebody else and you see the solution right in front of you and you're next. You know, what do I do? Well, change your issue, or let's reinforce it and do it again. So all the conducting studios will be here to reflect on that. And it is, again, not one of having the better idea per se, but sharing the ideas and then finding out how to refine them. We also take the point of view that at some point, some of you might be teaching conducting. Or teaching voice. And we want you to do it well. But to do this profession well, in my opinion, is to have a level of intellectual honesty that does not allow you to bluff. So the adult fraud thing is off the table. When you don't know, what do you say?
I don't know.
But you know, when the student comes in with that information, guess what you can have by the next day? The stuff. You can have the knowledge. So I'm saying, you've got people with knowledge, access it. You know, I'm always amazed when I do a conference and people say, oh, I still have a lot of questions. I say, well, email me. I never hear from them again.
Aww.
It's always a little hurtful, like they didn't really want to know, you know? So Rounds is really about that kind of very small look into the whole of what you're doing and say, how can we improve that? Let me ask you to ponder two things. Are you making comments to each other when people conduct? Anybody noticing anything about those comments? You're not commenting on them. You're commenting on yourself. Because what you see in them is what you're reflecting on when you write. You may think you've transformed yourself from that, but we can't ever get away from it. I can't ever get away from watching you work down here and go, oh, that looks a lot like what I have a problem with, you know, or that's what I'm doing. We do it very easily because we, in fact, reflect in other people and imbue in other people our own issues usually. So to learn to be a really good clinician and learn to be really good at this, you have to really step back and you have to see the bigger picture, the piece of music. You have to see the response of the individual to the piece of music. You have to think about their audiation, and then you have to think about their gestural efficiency. So what I'd like to talk about for the next few minutes is the gestural efficiency, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to kind of jump in. I'm going to start this part of our process with asking Dr. Bellin to come down and take you through the exercise of inflection, which we talked about before. When we study a score and hear its inflection, that leads to the gestures that we make. Now, the gestures can come in with the tradition of a pattern that you know, a 4/4, a 3/4, all that. The difference here is we're not going to impose that pattern on the surface of the music any more than when you watch Dudamel, you see him conduct the traditional pattern. You see him conduct effectively and musically, and with accentuation and energy and dynamic, right? Which is all we want to be. But Rounds, hello, over here, Earth. Rounds,
Just right here.
everybody's looking over here. That's the gecko, this is the subject. So what we try to do is get to the nut of it as much as we can. In other words, we're looking for the most junior level within our understanding of the pedagogy as we created it. It's not a criticism of other pedagogies, but most of them are built around the principles that it starts with a pattern. There's someone took a sabbatical, I was sharing this with Dr. Bell, and they came up to Running Springs to talk to me for a while. And it's right before I published my own book, along with my colleagues here. I said, well, I'm excited about your new book. He says, tell me what you teach first. He said, oh, it's all about patterns. And I went, oh, well, I might have something to say about that. And he goes, what do you mean? He says, do you think of imposing patterns on the music should come before understanding the music and let the patterns be created out of the music? He just looked at me like I was talking a foreign language. Like, that's heresy. But what you're about to learn is what the foundation of this, the rhythmic weights and the rhythmic inflection are all about. So, and not push, because when they go, yeah, they get that quality in their sound, right? Because their original quality is, yeah, and someone told them they're too breathy. Just let it be, all right? It'll naturally flow in somewhere around 17 or 18, they'll be perfectly fine. But if they don't, then they have this chink in their sound. The name of this is mutation chink. And they forever have this kind of little gap in your voice that you have to send to a therapist to get out of it, right? A good check on that, by the way, is this sound here. Like you're blowing through a straw. Keep your chest high and calm. So it's not this Dudley Do-Right. Hi, Dudley Do-Right of the mouthpiece. That's the kernurdle where the vocal folds have bowed. It's this sound. Where I feel gentle pressure against my lips and a lot of buzz and nothing here. And another way to check this pressure, in therapy we use balloons a lot to do this, or straws. Just make sure it's the right diameter straw. Too big of a straw does nothing. It has to be a smallish straw, or pinch it, right? But you can use your handy thumb if it's clean. That's the quickest way I know to get a break out of a young voice, is to balance the air pressure. So, because on their unbalanced air pressure, it's ya. So at 71, I haven't forgotten how to do that. Versus ya, where we have the smoother glide going towards the head voice, the super head voice. So if it's not quite correct, it'll sound like an elephant trumpet. But if it's correct, it'll sound a little bit more like the air wrench in a garage. There you're getting better chord approximation, okay? And as long as you're not putting extra pressure on the neck, you're in good balanced air pressure. So when you do the try to keep the air pressure on a level ground. Ready, and make sure you're finishing on a bub. Anybody know the reason why? It's for your next breath. Because if you go bum, you collapsed everything. As opposed to bum. And we call that kind of equalized breath pressure what? Anybody know the A word? Appoggio, right? And there you go. Does it kind of feel like you're singing inside yourself?
Yep.
Have that feeling rather than pushing your voice? That's a B flat. Pretty easy, right? And as a group, I think we're sounding pretty good. And here's our last section. Go and. How's your vocalism feel?
Good.
Pretty good? All right, let's have a seat and let's talk about it a little bit. I'm especially wanting to know from a couple of sources here. Rob, I don't know how many choirs you've ever had the chance to vocalize per se. Probably just studio vocalization. What would you say some of your goals as a teacher of voice, when you're first meeting a client, first time you meet, what would you like to get them to understand and know, maybe as a takeaway from their first time at voice?
the ability to play.
That's right. Because it's through the play we can do what?
Right. You can learn. I mean, it's such the environment changes immediately.
That's
Obviously.
right.
I mean, it's not a criticism, but it's instruction, and it's a free environment to.
And it's freeing because we don't have to repeat the old models to be right. We can use them, we can access them, but we get to compare them against other models. So did I do any modeling for you today? When did I do the modeling? The second you walked in the door. It's amazing how many choral conductors will talk like this the whole time and then expect their choir to sing well. You've already created a context where it's hard to sing well. But if you turn your voice into this and model that, then you have a better shot at creating that. And I think that's where the play begins. Dr. St. Marie, how about for you?
I think for me, it's I try to get the air just moving freely without allowing preconceived notions to conform it or tighten it up.
Yeah, we sometimes call this allowing the body to move so you don't brace. So let's create a theme here, that the antidote to fixed tension, which is energy, so close your fist and hold it tight. That's energy, right? But not any of this gesture here is productive in singing, because there is no muscle that you hold in that manner. Now, let that muscle relax a little bit and repurpose it so it can do this. Now the tight fist will no longer be helpful, will it? Okay, so it's not so much that I released, a word I tend to avoid in my studio, it's much more that I repurposed my coordination to a different balance. I balanced it differently. And that antidote is motion. So if you want to get rid of bracing or you want to get breath moving, you have to be in motion to make that happen, and the motion must be coordinated and balanced. And as I've told many of you before, I've eliminated all the breathing exercises that I know, and I know a ton of them, and used a lot of them. But I found that the student wasn't always able to access it. It's just simply this hot air principle, because it sets the posture up, it gets the right airflow, and as long as the person can talk inside of that purposed airflow, do you hear the difference? By the way, this is the same thing as trumpet playing. When I played and I played aggressively, and blow too hard, then I wasn't flexible in my playing. That I had to learn to back off and use only as much air as was needed. This is going to be true when you're singing, by the way. You don't take the same breath for every phrase, you take the breath that's needed for every phrase. Because what happens, especially for higher voices, when you take too much breath, what happens when you ascend? You pack, and you do exactly what the bracing thing we're talking about here is. And it's hard to unlock that unless you just restart. Okay? Anything else unusual about the approach? I know, Dr. Gravas, you've vocalized many choirs. Do you have any goals when you start to vocalize a choir that are important to you?
I want them to listen more than sing.
Okay? And where are they listening? Because I want to talk about that concept. Listening to each other or listening inside their own head?
Listen inside their own head more than to each other.
Because the fact is, and there's two principles we talk about here. Practicing in front of the mirror shows you what? What happened, not what's going to happen. This is why videoing yourself is so much more valuable, because then you see yourself in real time, projecting what you want, rather than reflecting on what you had. Conducting is not reflection, nor is singing. It's not a reflecting of activity. That happens after we sing. That happens after we vocalize, we sit down and we reflect on it. We reflect on our experience. So we have to know the order of these things. If we're reflecting while we're doing it, then our better sense of listening to the, what we would call maybe the halo of the sound that hangs above our head in most good choirs, is we can't access it because we're too busy what? Focusing back in on ourselves. I call it the negative loop. You know, you're constantly repeating the same bad activity because you're not prepping anything. You don't have any prep going. So in real time, you're feeling something. And I'll give you another strategy about that in a minute. It has to do with room organization. But what I think Dr. Gravis is alluding to that is so important is that there should never be a sound you make without a musical intention. That's what listening means in our context of this pedagog. Bless you.
Sorry.
And that to make a sound without a musical purpose is to, in a certain sense, just waste your time. And this is what Bernard said to me in my very first lesson with. He said, practicing breathing is a waste of time. He says, because unless you apply the breath to a sound, you don't know what the breathing is really doing in actuality. It was such a practical thing to say. But I realized that's what my trumpet teachers all made me do. I had to hold the mouthpiece and buzz into the mouthpiece and be successful at that before I could put it in the horn. And I had to play all my pieces on my lips and on the mouthpiece before I could use the facility of this. That was all. I don't know if that works in your world too, Sarah, but it's just a lot of getting the setup right? So the one breath exercises of hot air is that I use. Now, you are free to use all the other things that you want to use. Please do, if you find them helpful. I find them delaying. They delay the inevitable understanding. Because how much do you have to understand about taking a breath when you go like this? Nothing, because you already know how to do that. This is another way of saying, try to look at the things that we do every day. One of the things I like about these teachers is that they use everyday experiences to inform our moment. All right? For instance, in conducting gesture, we'll often use the bouncing of a ball. All right? Now, if you want to bounce that ball faster, do you get larger or you get smaller? Okay, so therefore, when the music is going faster, your larger beat is not helping. And especially in syncopated things where I see a lot of people go, and I go, whoop. How do you follow it? Well, they're feeling it. I mean, they might as well be on the dance floor. That's cool. But that's not leading it. That's following it, if you understand the idea here. So under the intention of intention, when we start to vocalize, we want our clients to experience what? Their own sensations. Now, let me give you an example of that. Who can I pick on? Oh, I'll pick on Evan because he's so close by. So Evan, will you mind standing before your colleagues? Okay, so let's start up here with you. Would you go? That's a beautiful tone. Could you make it a little brighter, please? Now, how many of you notice his face? What did his face do?
Kind of lifted a little bit.
It what?
It lifted a bit.
It lifted, but it looked,
Tense.
no, it looked confused. Because now he's searching for what? What the hell does bright mean? All right? Or if I say make it darker, right? You'll see the frown. But that's our reaction when we're given terms that have no specific meaning. And we use them all the time in rehearsal, don't we? For instance, if I want them more attached to their breath, I don't say more attached to your breath, I just say hotter air. It's faster. And they immediately know how to do it. Hotter air, oh good. Right? But what if we do this? Let's all do this together. I want you to place your hand here and go, mmm. And then go here and go, mmm. And then go here and go, mmm. And go here and go, mmm. You feeling buzziness in all those places? Good. Here's the place no one knows about. Place your hand here. Feel the buzz in the palm of your hand? All right? So if I want your sound to be darker, I want you to feel this. And if I want your sound to be brighter, I want you to feel this. So watch what happens when I ask him to sing brighter now, and you go, and that to me is authentically brighter and in balance and has a good sense of sound, and it's his own sensation, not his interpretation of the teacher's term. Make sense?
Yeah.
So this is particularly true when we're conducting, isn't it? Because you're conveying sensations in advance of them happening. And the more you hook your people up to that, the faster things can go for you. Not perfect, because there's a learning curve to this. But if I want him to go darker, now he'll find a way to achieve darkness. That's far more successful than changing the placement of the vowel or even adjusting the vocal tract, which is what he's actually doing. Because in order to make this resonance, he had to lower the bottom lip and go, and in order to do this one, he had to go, right? You saw him make the facial changes. I might acknowledge that later. I'm very careful with group dynamic to start noticing those things because I can't account for what everybody's feeling. But you saw me, those have been vocalized by me before, saw me make changes because I was listening to the core of the sound and saying, what do I think the greater activity is, and I adjusted accordingly. That's really the magic behind a pro art. It's not a fixed way of vocalizing, but it's a responsorial activity to what is actually happening in real time. It does have a mechanistic side to it. That is, you can develop the choir sound over a period of time, securely, reinforced by your hand gesture, but it's not based on not allowing people to come with what they've got. And it's not about saying you're singing wrong, right, which goes on along. Or telling a student who comes in and loves a certain pop star that they're just off in left field and they might as well give up. They know what they know, and they know what they feel. And so you need to build on that. So now if I bridge that, I say, I'd like you to sing a little bit brighter. I use your hand to assist you. Thank you. Okay, this time I want you to roll across the top like this rather than like this. Ready? There's still a little bit too much of a gut punch. Kick your hand. That's the one I'm looking for. So we're a little bit more successful in the upper passaggio. We're a little bit more connected. That sound won't perfectly sustain yet because there's other elements that you go to, but he has access to it. All of your young basses, baritones, and tenors can achieve that kind of connection if they think about the ring of their voice, which is developing around 16 or 17. Thank you. Where does the ring of the voice come from, by the way? Pardon?
Performance.
Well, it is formed, but where is it created?
Is it your cheek?
No, it's not. All of this is biological feedback. There are 222 bones in your face. That's why an injury to your face is so risky, because there's so many little bones that can shatter. I sat for years at Cameron's, my hangout, next to the chief surgeon at USC of maxillofacial. He's actually world-class famous, and we would talk about he'd teach me for hours about how this works. I don't think he really wanted to, but I'd buy him a drink and get the stuff out of him. But what you're feeling is feedback, it's not resonance. Let's be clear about that. What is resonance to the vocalist? Let's describe what resonance is to the piano. When I press this key, what happens?
Hammer strikes.
Hammer hits,
Strings.
3 steel strings under huge amounts of pressure, creates a waveform which is then amplified by the sounding board. This is called forced resonance. You've had a stereo on too loud in your house and a dish starts vibrating, that's forced resonance. Now the dish isn't resonating and producing a sound itself per se, it is reflecting the resonance that's been given to it by the source. The voice, you'll need to write this down, is a closed tube resonator. Now what's the difference in a closed tube resonator? There's a source, excuse me, of the vibration, in this case, caused by the vocal folds coming to approximation, that is, close together, and then they adduct when the air goes through them. Now when the air goes through them, there's a change in pressure above, supra, below, sub, and in the space itself, glottal. Supraglottal, subglottal, and the glottis itself. It's a space. Now, if the larynx is slightly lower than in normal speech, and more like this, then we get an extra dimension of sound. In fact, I'm using less breath, not more, but I'm promoting the ring of my voice by opening up a sinus called the piriform sinus. And when the piriform sinus slightly opens, that ring called the singer's formant comes into being. And it's interesting that in early singing, pre-Rossini, the larynxes of most singers were held fairly high. And they'd be a little bit more agile, a little bit lighter in sound, and they didn't want to fill up the space with a lot of sound. Most composers considered it big singing, yeah, as unlovely and not really pretty. But at the time of Rossini, a voice teacher by the name of Garcia responded to the need for singers to have a greater sound in a bigger space and to project over instruments. So he discovered that by lowering the larynx, not that much, that a sinus appeared called the piriform sinus, and the ring occurs there. It's the only vibration added to the sound other than the vocal folds. So what you have to picture is the vocal folds produce this rainbow of perfect sound, and the vocal tract works as a pass filter, not an amplifier. It's a pass filter. So depending on your culture, depends on the formation of the mouth to allow the certain sounds to come out. And your larynx, excised from the body with a little air blown through it, sounds a little bit more like It sounds like a duck call. But then you add the mouth resonant, and that becomes enculturated. So some societies prefer the sound to stay in the more natural, where the complete overtone series there. And we tend to like, with the overtone suppressed to just 3, 4, 5, 6. And we deny the 7th, and we deny the 11th. So this is why in some cultures they sound out of tune to you. They're not, they're adding other partials. We can hear early jazz singers in America sing the 7th and 11th partial very loudly. The 7th partial is 31 cents flat to our sensibilities. And the F sharp, which is the 11th partial, is 51 cents to the flat side. So we enculturate our tuning and our taste by tradition, not by actual true listening to the sound. It's another way of saying we like what we know. But the challenge for us as conductors is that every composer that we perform has a different sound ideal, don't they? And so we have to kind of find that. And that's unlocked in the puzzle by analyzing the music, which we think we have some good systems to do that. But one of the things I want to figure out when I look at a piece for the first time is what's its timbre? What is a timbre? Does it take much imagination? Gosh, my brain is on lockdown here. Does it take imagination to know who that composer is? Okay, you all know that because he did something very clever. He created a sound icon that the second you hear, you go, Barton. All right? But then he's clever enough to compose it out, which we'll talk about in the week of festival. He doesn't just repeat it. He actually has ways of having it support the text in new and somewhat different ways. You know, I used to hear the opening chord of Dieu qui l'a fait bon regarder. It's in several pieces, but all of a sudden you hear that F sharp chord and you go, that's Debussy, because of its position and its timbre and its quality. That got me on the thought that, well, does every great composer have a signature timbre? And the answer is yes, they do. So what's our challenge? This is getting back to the warm-up, is to create the instrument with the greatest flexibility to access all of those, which means we have to get what Dr. St. Marie said, we have to get the bracing out because that prevents those accesses, all right? Or if they just, I don't want to say it this way, if they favor becoming a pop singer, then let them keep their bracing. Because it's probably what makes their sound truly unique. And they don't need a voice teacher to mess that up. Now, keep them from hurting themselves, yes, get them better breathing, technique, all that's fine. Or as Dr. Gravis said, to be a person who not only listens to yourself, but this is a hybrid listening that starts with what? What's the listening for yourself? And I described it when I worked with Evan. We're listening to the feeling of it, all right? What do we call that when you are in one sensory mode and then another sensory mode is stimulated by that? You know this term?
That is resonance.
It's called synesthesia. So people that hear a certain language and they see certain kinds of flowers, you know. The place they're studying this, by the way, is at Caltech. They've been studying this now for about 25 years. Synesthetics. I had one synesthetic student at USC. She was an alto science student. Pardon? No. She played viola or violin also. Anyway, if I said I want this to have more silver in it, she would produce the sound I want. And she taught me her code. She taught me that when I played this, this felt very transparent. But the minute I added this, all of a sudden there was another color in. And she'd actually see the colors. I've had 3 students actually like that. I had a student who couldn't match pitch in my sight reading class at PCC. And she was getting frustrated, and she was failing all the tests, so I called her and said, how can I help you? She said, well, I just don't get it, I don't understand. I said, well, what do you want to do? She says, well, every time you play something, I see colors. And I'll try to remember during festival week to bring this chart in, but she did a 2-page artwork for me that had all the colors she saw. And they were unbelievably detailed, with organic material all over. Well, what she was describing was fractals. Because I looked up what she was doing and I could see the fractals, but she'd related them to specific pitches. So once I got her to think in terms of the fractals, she started matching pitch. It was the weirdest thing.
Whoa.
She ended up getting an A in the class because she made the connection. What tends to happen in our culture is what? You just ain't got it, honey, go on the road, right? We do this a lot. We do it in our choirs, by the way, by making someone feel that they're less than. We take the gifts they've got and we use this gestalt and we try to keep that gestalt going. But it is mechanistic. That is, we do go A to B to C to D at some point to make sure we've checked all the boxes. It's making sense? And then we add another layer to it, which is called the nested hierarchy, where we say there is a relationship between this A plus B plus C plus D that you need to examine and learn to look at. So if you go back and reflect on what we did in the vocalizing today, it was multi-layered. You may or may not have noticed. That's okay. I don't have to have my choir students tested at the end of the week to know that they learned what I taught them, but they do have to express it. They do have to make it real in that sense. Questions? Yes.
It's not a question, but it's something I wrote down in seminar my first year, and you just kind of touched upon it. And I have written this down where I'm teaching. I try to write it down in my plan, and it is whatever the sound was the gift that was given. And it's just so important. When you were asking the teachers to share, that to me was it's put me in a place of how can I help you, instead of a place of, oh, that's not going to work, or that doesn't work, or whatever. It's a gift. It's what came from that person.
Yeah, what beautifully said. And what complicates that is what Dr. Bellin and I have experienced through our lives. He was not just free boasting yesterday in class when he says he's been around some of the greats. I mean, if you read any choral book on the people that made this craft what it was in the 50s and 60s and 70s, he and I were both lucky enough, dumb lucky is the way to put it, to be in their presence for hours and hours and hours and hours. And I'd say that probably what limited us when we left those places is because they were first very powerful and very influential, is we tried to imitate them. Mm-hmm. Not a bad thing, but just not where music should end up in your soul. It should end up as feeling like your own invention, out of your own study. You see what
I called it the Roger Wagner School of Charm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you could go around high schools all over Southern California and find that the way people talk to their choirs were in the voice of Roger. There was a lot of barking and a lot of yelling and a lot of finger pointing and all that. And although he was charming, he was not very patient. But he had an incredible sound ideal. And once you heard that sound or experienced it by singing it, Dr. Gravis said something very kind and lovely the other day. I was trying to cajole all of the faculty to conduct something. He said, no, this summer you're conducting all the pieces. I went, oh, geez, well, thank you very much. But he said, what was kind about it, he said, I want to experience your rehearsal and your approach and your way of doing it. We've been talking about it for years now. He didn't say these words, but I said it to myself, prove it. You know? Show it, demonstrate. I don't want you to imitate it. I just want you, I hope you're inspired by it. I don't know. Thursday, you may be looking at me ready to, you know, kick me out of the room. But the point is that we were deeply inspired by these people. You know, I was in a summer workshop and it was a choral literature class taught by Hugh Saunders. I don't know if any of you know who Hugh was. He was the director of Baylor for years. Great guy, super nice guy. Very good friend of Charles Hurt, and Charles Hurt couldn't be there for the summer, so he invited him out to teach the choral lit, 1975. And so the first thing he says in choral lit, who are the best choral conductors in the country? Blah, 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 blah. I don't know who they are. He goes, well, number one, Charles Hurt, and then Howard Swan, and then Roger Wagner, and then Robert Shaw, and he went down the list, and I realized I was a soloist for 7 of those 10 people. I didn't know they were famous. I just thought they were good. No, there was no chart of who was the most famous, right? So all of a sudden I realized, ooh, I've had some powerful influences. I better work on this, right? Because you have a certain obligation when you're around things that really work, not to imitate them, but to bring them into your own lexicon, into your own study, and then evolve them. I don't want you to vocalize like I vocalize, but I'd love to have you understand the process. So there's a pro-art, which is a nested hierarchy of audiation, informing posture. Posture has a subset called somatic sensory. Would you all say E? E. All say A? A. All say Ah? Ah. Good. Would you pretend you say E? Would you pretend you say A? Would you pretend you say Ah? Did you hear the vowel before you changed the shape? That's audiation to somatic sensory. It even goes one step further. If I ask you to sing E, just say E. Say E. E. Say A. A. Say Ah. Ah. Do it again, Dr. Bell. E. A. Ah. And I do it with a dead hand. It's so much better if I do this. E. A. Ah. Doesn't that just feel better? Yeah. All right, well, the reason for that is that the somatic sensory that I feel is going to the proprioception that I allow, not that I notice, that I allow. And so instead of keeping my hand dead, I let my hand change to the shape of the vocal tract and I get a better result. It can also be very messy, by the way, just to let you know. But these changes that we feel more authentically come from our inside experience. And our singers will sing better in our choirs when they take personal responsibility for their own voice. And not have to stand under the glare of the great I am that is standing in front and say, you must sound this way, you must sound that way. Because they don't get it. You don't get it. You've never understood what a choir director means when they're asking for a specific tone. But if my choir is going like this, will you all say E? E. Say it again inside. Say it again. E. It changed. It changed because I changed the somatic sensory and you responded like that. So much better than saying, now you all need to learn to drop the jaw. Make sure you keep your head in a soft palate and make sure you stretch here and then make sure your posture. And by the time you're finished, what is the person doing? And if you want to know what that looks like, watch the I Love Lucy where she tries to become a ballet dancer. It's the best example of this problem that we have of teaching, that we think our goal is to teach the person what they're doing wrong, as if that's the starting point. What we do is lift up what they're doing right and then give them a pathway to add to the other things. That's the mechanistic side. The Gestalt says, I take you as you are. The mechanistic says, but we need to cover A, B, C, D, E, and F. That makes some sense? Yes?
It occurs to me that it's rather than imposing, it's speaking to understand and shift.
That's true, but here's the caveat. I know what I'm doing. I'm open to the fact that when I do it and it doesn't work, maybe I need to readjust. But I can tell you, having vocalized people now over 50 years, there's not much that escapes this ear to get people to do what I want them to do vocally. And all I did is put myself in the position of saying, does this client need therapy or do they need to learn to be expressive? Now, I'm not talking about mental therapy, that's somebody else's job. I'm talking about physical therapy. Now, you might be interested to know that Dr. St. Marie comes from the tradition of what? What'd you get your bachelor's in?
Music therapy.
Music therapy. So if you want to know something about that, there's your guy, right? And if you want to know about the traditions of working with young voices and how to make those work, Dr. Gravis, where do you work? At a cathedral, where they employ that tradition. And he studied it quite extensively. Or if you want to know how to be in the master chorale, or sing in front of the master chorale, or sing in a great opera company, how many operas have you contracted for in your life, Mr. McNeil? Too many to count, all right? But he's been one of our favorite soloists, not only in Southern California, but you know, from going on 25 years, I think it's 30 years almost when I heard you for the first time in front of LA Master Chorale. So you have resources here that if you have questions, you might want to get into that. If you want to understand the traditions of Roger Wagner, talk to Bill. I mean, the guy was his accompanist on tour. Hello. As well as the singer, right? So the point is we're not selling a point of view, we're selling a process which can reveal multiple expressive things. And I think my goal in vocalizing someone is to put them in their highest expressive potential. Consistently.
So at the posture part or in the idiosyncratic sensory, this has not seemed anywhere better, I think, than in our first and second year recital in the summer, when the same group of singers sings for 15 different conductors, and the ensemble sounds so, the same group of people sound completely different for each one of those
Absolutely.
conductors. And so my question, Professor Berger, is to what degree is empathy, posture empathy, somatosensory empathy on the part of the conductor necessary in their imagination, or musical imagination as conductors?
It's such a great question, because there is a tradition, particularly an Anglican tradition, that the gesture of the conductor is to create consensus but not meaning. The meaning is imbued by the chamber ensemble member, that the person who is singing is putting the meaning into the music, which is why you can watch conductors from certain places conduct what looks like very dry, very unexpressive, but the singers are super expressive, right? Because they've been trained to do that and take that responsibility on. So I'll just take 1 minute to explain why I got to where I got. I taught at a community college for 40 years. In those 40 years, I had often singers no longer than one semester. But I refused to do cheesy music. I wanted to do masterworks and great choral pieces. So I had essentially 8 weeks to train them to sing a program that many of them couldn't read. Like the first time I passed out the midwinter songs of Lawrence, and the whole group just looked at me like. And I'll say this, and I know this is, telling a nice tale on myself, but when Lawrence got up on stage at that retrospective, this was 2012 or 2013, and we had just finished midwinter, he looked at the choir with tears in his eyes, and he looked at the audience and says, "That was the finest performance you will ever hear of that word."
Wow.
And I was like, wow. Now, is it a work I know really well? Yeah. And I had done it many times before. But the point is, I delivered to the composer what he had in his ears. So this is my long answer to your question. I take it as a personal responsibility to try to get the sound ideal as best I can of a certain composer, and have my conducting be transparent to it as best I can. Because I feel it gets us to the end game faster than either having to hire professionals to do their thing, because I don't ever work with pros in that sense, and I've got to get them there today rather than tomorrow. So even though I won't explain everything, if I can show it, like right now, like I chose vaudeville programs. I conducted it at SC. I conducted the chamber singers under Charles Hurd. I can't get it out of my head. The gesture that he used for the first time. I don't use his gesture, but his gesture was.
Oh.
I'll never forget it. And I was so inspired. And then I realized I couldn't make that work. Because because I was imitating his outer caricature and not the inner meaning. And so I learned that I had to go, that's me. And I think it conveys something similar to what Charles got, but it has to come through this vessel. So I'm not too troubled if people look real different in their conducting, as long as I can see the music more out front than less. And so our first job in the conducting class is to teach you guys, we think, to honestly reflect your own audiation before we question your audiation. Because you have to have that ear attached before you can attach the other. My philosophy, and I think you have a buy-in on that too. But you don't have to, you could stand in front of a lot of choirs and they just simply have learned not to look at you. I do this with a lot of orchestras. The first 10 minutes with an orchestra is really hard because they're not looking at me. David Lockington, once we were doing Serenade to Music of Vaughan Williams, he said, I want to listen, Don, come up here and conduct the orchestra. I thought, oh my God, I could stand in front of this incredible orchestra. And for a second I said to myself, do I want to look like David? Because the choir was sounding a little less balanced, they weren't sounding as big. Or do I have to do what I know how to do to make the sound? So for the first couple of beats, and David, by the way, is a super fabulous conductor. Every face was in the score until I conducted one little violin lick. And then you could see all the people in the back of the room go, what? Because it looked so different. And I went on for the next 14 minutes and finished the work, and you could hear the choir get louder and louder and louder, because I was giving them good vocal posture to do that. And you could hear the choir, you could hear the orchestra rebalancing. And David came up and he says, I can't believe I just witnessed what I just witnessed, because his ears are so good. And I said, you did. And he says, can you explain that? And I said, I can. And the first violinist walks off stage and said, you know, I was having such trouble with that solo, and all of a sudden I could play it flawlessly. What happened? And I said, well, we'll talk someday. But what I was doing is just audiating and I'm trusting my hand showing the shapes. That's all that was happening. Needless to say, David's never let me conduct again. Does that kind of, in a fulsome way, answer your question?
Yes.
There's points of view about this. And I think if you're standing in front of a bunch of instrumentalists who know how to play their part, don't oversell the education part. They don't like it. They don't want to be told how to do things. But if you're standing in front of amateurs, they sometimes need to know how to do things, so you've got to up that part of your game. Okay, I would like to invite Professor McNeil to come up and spend about 10-15 minutes talking about your juries and getting yourselves prepped for that. So let's welcome Dr. McNeil.